All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro Podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman. On the show with me today, we have a special guest, Dr. Irvine Nugent. Irvine has seen firsthand how any new business skill won't be effective unless it's paired with true emotional intelligence. He spent the majority of his career helping leaders and organizations harness the power of their emotions in powerful ways to create deeper connections, make more informed and level-headed decisions, and increase their influence throughout their career and life. Having grown up in a society torn apart by a dramatic period of violence and division, he's seen the worst of what can happen when communication breaks down and people fail to listen and understand each other nor manage conflict. This formed the foundation of his desire to help people communicate and listen better with one another throughout the world. Since then, Irvine has served in senior leadership roles for a wide range of organizations and become an internationally recognized trainer and top-rated keynote speaker. He's also one of the world's only globally certified FACS coders, earning his PhD from Capella University with a focus on leadership during crisis, and graduated from Georgetown University's executive coaching program. He's also the author of Leadership Lessons from the Pub, a book on what the Irish pub can teach leaders about emotional intelligence. So, Irvine, welcome to the show.
Toby, great to be with you. Thanks so much for the invitation.
So, I usually would start off these shows a bit different, but with that last little bit of the bio, tell me what can we learn about, what can leaders learn from the pub?
Yeah, it's a great question. So where it came from really was years of sitting, listening to leaders. And one of the most common things that came up was, how do we make our workplaces a place where people want to be in, a place where they feel they belong, and a place that they feel loyal to? And the more I reflect upon that question, one of the things that suddenly came to my mind was I grew up in a pub in Northern Ireland. And I said, here's this institution that has been around for hundreds of years. And it does an amazing job with a number of things. First of all, it creates community. It creates a place where people want to be in. People call it their local. That's my place. And also it does very well, when you listen to the conversations that are happening, there's a lot of vulnerability there. There's a lot there. This place is not a place where you have to pretend to be someone else. You go in there and you don't have to have your ers or graces, as we say in Ireland. You just go in with your warts, and it's a place of support. And so I thought that there's many lessons about what's created in that space. Now, we use things like psychological safety and different things, modern terms now, to create a space in the workplace. But I think the pub does in a great way, create that kind of community. And so what are some of the ways? Well, creating psychological safety, creating the leader, setting the tone, this understanding of emotional contagion, that basically we influence each other emotionally, and that impacts what's happening in the space that we are there. The power of story to create emotional experience, empathy. So all of these things are happening in the pub. And I think there's a lot of lessons as well in what I like to say is creating more human workplaces.
So was it part of that experience in the pub that, was that originally kind of what, have you made these connections recently, or was this something that you started noticing as you were actually growing up? And did that at all influence your career path that you ended up getting into, kind of studying and teaching this different stuff?
So I think it's a little both and Toby. I think growing up, certainly I was brought up, I think I've begun to appreciate even more that environment. So it certainly, I grew up in a very divided society, and my father, he created a pub where both Catholics and Protestants could go to. And he just said, as long as you're not fighting, anyone is welcome. And so even, I grew up in like basically violence all around me. And so part of it was, God, we have to be better than this. This can't be all that is left for humanity to break down and strife. So I think there was an understanding. I don't think I'd have intellectualized it at the pub, but I think there was always, this is a special place. There's something happening here that is different. And then I think recently, as I reflect upon it, and actually I've had conversations with a number of my friends who I didn't realize, but they attended bar growing up. And every single one of them said, the most emotionally intelligent people are barmen or bar women, because they just deal with all these different personalities, and they just have an ability to put people at ease and to create a space that is welcoming.
Very interesting. So tell me about kind of as you kind of began getting into this work. Tell me about kind of I guess, is your primary focus kind of like working with organizations, with businesses, teaching them these different techniques, or who is your kind of core audience?
Yeah, my core focus is on leadership and different levels of leadership. So either I will work with organizations, with groups of people within the organization, be that some senior leadership, or organizations that have high potentials, or training around this area, mid-level as well. And we do this in a number of different ways. Either that's through a training program, which will kind of expose people to the power of emotional intelligence and the difference that it makes. Sometimes as well, that's one-on-one coaching, but primarily it is in organizations, and primarily it is to do with leadership and the impact of leadership.
And tell me about, let's talk about emotional intelligence. Like, can we first kind of define it for the listeners, and then tell me kind of what the different components of emotional intelligence are?
Yeah, it's a great question. Emotional intelligence itself, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that as a term, it is a little bit of a catch-all. So it was never really developed. It's commonly compared to IQ, but it's not a really good comparison, because IQ is a very precise, delineated definition, whereas EQ is a little bit of a catch-all. For me, the best way to explain it is to actually break it down into 4 different areas. So when we're talking about emotional intelligence and someone who, say, has good or high emotional intelligence, then you're really talking about 4 areas in which they're skilled. And that first area would be self-awareness. So it is the ability to be aware of what is happening within ourselves, to be able to feel both that physiologically, and then also to be aware of emotions, to name those emotions, to be aware of the triggers, your emotional triggers, as they happen in the moment. The second element then is, with that awareness, then how do I manage that? How do I manage what is happening within me? Because sometimes it can be helpful for the context that we're in. Sometimes it might not be. And so how do we have tools to manage what is happening? Then and both of those are more self-directed. And then the last 2 areas is recognition of others. So recognizing others. Can I read the emotions of others? When I walk into a room, do I feel the emotional weight of that room? Am I able to read the emotions in people's faces? Do I know when there's shift of emotions when I look at other people? And then finally, how do I use that to interact and to create relationships? So am I able to hold conversation? Am I able to listen? Am I able to use questions powerfully? All of these then are decisions and conflict. All of this is part of relationship management as well. So it's those 4 concepts, and that really is what makes up emotional intelligence.
And how can you kind of talk to me about, like, individuals, say, like in the workplace,
Yep.
managers, leaders who have high emotional intelligence versus those who have low emotional intelligence? How would that sort of reflect in terms of interacting, their sort of role, just in terms of their performance at work?
Good question. Let's just take an example, okay? You're in a weekly meeting and you're the head of the meeting, and people are given report back on a project that they're working on. The project is delayed, so there's a little bit of emotional tension there. There's a lot of stress going on. And say the boss has issues with one employee who's always a little bit late in their deliveries. So a person with very high emotional intelligence, first of all, even before the meeting started, would become aware that they're under stress, would become aware that there's a lot of tension in the room. As they sit down and there's reports happening, they're able to read kind of people and where people are at with this. When it comes to this person, perhaps that they have an issue with, all of a sudden the person says, not surprisingly, I don't have the work, or I'm delayed, etc. And normally what that'll happen is it'll set off an emotional trigger within the leader. And so then if the leader is aware of that, there's a little bit of expectation that might have happened. And so they're able to, instead of react to that situation, they're able to become aware of that and maybe use something like a breathing technique or something, just to realize that at this moment they're in that state, and they could say something that is destructive or say something that really doesn't help the situation. And so they catch themselves, and then they ask, they're able to calmly say, well, is there something we should know? Is there something about the delay, or something, in a very calm way? Whereas, say, a person with low emotional intelligence is probably not really too aware that there's a lot of tension happening. And then all of a sudden they get triggered, and kind of that triggering is so rapid, it goes into some sarcastic remark or something that happens, and all of a sudden the tone ratchets up, there's tension. It may lead to even conflict or something being said back and forth. And so that's really, the day-to-day reality of how the difference in emotional intelligence can impact. So that's going to impact what happens to that meeting, the output of that meeting, solutions that could potentially happen. And all of that is part and parcel of having strong emotional intelligence.
Awesome. Let's move on to talking about one of the things I mentioned when I was reading your bio. So you're one of the globally recognized FACS experts, which I don't believe I elaborated on what that stands for. Facial Action Coding System. So you're a facial expression expert. Tell me about that's kind of what that entails, and the importance of facial expressions.
So really, it goes, back in the 1960s, really there was, psychology was all behavioralist. There was very little awareness or even desire to study affect or emotions. And that began to change with the work of a number of psychologists, most primarily Paul Ekman. And then the beginning of this kind of new research, and really it enabled kind of things like emotional intelligence to come later. So one of the things that through that research was that we begin to realize that rather than facial expression totally being cultural and different, rather there was strong research to indicate that some of those emotions were universal, that no matter where you were in the world, no matter the culture, no matter the sex of the person, the age, that they showed these emotions in the same way in their face. And the tool, the mechanism to measure that was through the development of this FACS, which is facial action coding system. And basically what it does is it's taken the 42 muscles of the face, it goes through their movements and how they move, and then it enables when you see an expression in the face for that face to be coded. So it creates a common language around what is happening in the face. Now, why is that important? Because it's being used in a number of different ways. It's being used, first of all, for emotional expression. So if the person is happy or sad or contempt, we know there's different particular muscles that are moving, and that's the same universally. But it's also being used by animation. Now, why is animation so good now? Animation is so good now because they are using FACS to move the faces of the characters. And so that's why the characters' emotions look so good and so realistic. In fact, Paul Ekman, who was one of the creators, was the scientific advisor. You'll see the little figures behind me for Inside Out. which uses this. It's been used in self-driving cars. It's been used in other research. So this is kind of the basis for understanding what's happening in the face. A lot of AI technology, new technologies using it as well.
How good are so when it comes to reading facial expressions, most people, could see if someone is has a big smile on their face, that they're probably happy, and if they see them in disgust, they probably could recognize that too. But when it comes to just maybe reading more mild facial expressions, if you will, like how good are people at being able to recognize those facial expressions? And then I guess also, are you able to get better at, I assume, with training in this, as you've been talking about, you could probably increase your ability to sort of read facial expressions. Is that fair to say?
It is. So, I mean, I think some people are better than others. There are some people who really are not able to pick up on some facial signals. Part of that, well, the first thing to say, Toby, is we have a natural bias into words. We're almost taught that it's important to focus on the words that people are using. So, like when you're practicing about a conversation, you're always practicing, what words will I use? And in reality, therefore, we at times miss what's happening in the face because we're so focused on the words. But I think some people are better than others. But it is a skill that can absolutely be learned. In fact, you can have some pretty dramatic improvement in a very short space of time if you learn some of those basic emotions and how they show up in the face. The other thing that is we now understand as well is that we can also learn to pick up on suppressed emotions. So what we know just from the timeline of an emotion, when you have something that a trigger for an emotion, what happens, of course, is within half a second, there's a physiological reaction, which is set into play that emotion. And one of the things that happens is that's displayed in the face. Well, we only become conscious of that after half a second. So even say if I'm talking with you, I'm angry with you, and I really don't want you to know I'm angry. I'm kind of, I'm getting angry. Let me suppress that. But it's too late. It's leaking out. So this is where the whole thing of micro expression comes, that you can then pick up on some of that leakage, that micro expressions. And again, you can be very much trained to pick that up because it's really just a muscle. It's a muscle to which really we haven't operated before. We're not really paying attention or focus to it. And so once we learn to do that, it is quite amazing what people then can pick up in conversation.
Do you think that, say, like meditation or mindfulness could play like a big role in terms of helping people uh, kind of cultivate this ability to read facial expressions better? Because I was just sort of thinking about the idea in terms of, if we're able to kind of bring more awareness to the present moment, as is the kind of one of the goals, I guess, of meditation or mindfulness, and you're more kind of aware of whatever's going on in the moment, you might be able to be more attuned to whatever those facial expressions, especially those micro expressions. Have you ever contemplated that idea, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So yes, and actually there is research in this too. So actually mindfulness is key actually in two areas. So you brought up the whole area of beginning to notice. So absolutely, because one of the things that any meditation or mindfulness practice, another word for that, we use mindfulness, but really it's all about focus. It's all about attention and focus. So to have that ability to be able to perhaps shut out some of the distraction and the noise and just to be present, which is one of the things that mindfulness helps us to do. Mindfulness helps us to be aware of distraction and then to let it go and to kind of recenter again. And part of that is in a conversation as well. There's so many distractions. So what we find is that people who have a meditation practice are much better at picking up emotions. But the second part of that as well is that you're also better able to pick up your own emotions. So like part of a mindfulness practice is a body scan, and a body scan is is an amazing practice to pick up on some of the subtle physiological changes that are happening in your body. And so the more that you're aware of that, the more you're, oh, something's happening. I'm angry, or I'm happy, or I'm feeling this or that, the other. So all of that is important as well. They've actually, there's some interesting research being done in with Davidson and University of Madison, Wisconsin, about, they've taken some really monks from Tibet who have been meditating for many, many years, and actually are curious about, can they perceive they're having an emotion quicker than anyone else? And can they even beat it? Can they even beat the consciousness? Can they drive the consciousness in? And of course, the body's too quick. But what they have found is that absolutely, that because of their intense practice of mindfulness, they are able to pick up these sensations much quicker than anyone else and earlier than anyone else.
Interesting. That's very interesting. I had a hunch that there was something there.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Yeah.
Let's talk about one of the things going back to what you were talking about when we were talking about lessons from the pub. In terms of, you talked about storytelling. Tell me
Mm-hmm.
about the importance of storytelling, and just how that uh, plays into your work and what you teach.
So I like to say I grew up in a diet of many different foods, but one of them was story. And story was very powerful both in my family and in my culture. The Irish have a particular word for someone, for a storyteller, and the word they use is a shanachie. And it's an interesting word to translate, but one of the translations you could have is the keeper of the tradition, the keeper of the history, the keeper, so this whole idea of the passing, the oral passing on. And I think that's important to recognize. Like, long before we had formalized language, even, we were drawing pictures on caves. And story is in many ways how human beings make meaning. When you think about the amount of data that comes in every day, and we have to pick and choose which data we go to. And stories really are a way that we express what's happening. And through those stories, we have meaning. And what we understand as well now from stories, of course, just from a neuroscientific point of view, is that they're sticky. They stay with us. Why are they so powerful? And it's because not only are we listening to another person. So if you tell me a story, I'm not just listening to your story. As far as my brain's concerned, I'm actually experiencing that story. I'm living that story. And so that's why they're so powerful. That's why Hollywood knows this. This is why movies are so powerful, because we get sucked into these stories. So as a medium to convey connection, and as a medium to convey meaning, stories are powerful. And I think at times leaders don't use them enough. And I think I work with a lot of people on presentation skills, and it's very interesting. You'll give a presentation, and it's got all this different data, etc. And a story is there, and you stop a person who goes out the door, and you say, "What did you remember about that presentation?" It was the story. So if we can use story strategically, if we can say we want to express something about a certain data point, if there's a story around that, people are going to attach themselves to that. Or if we want to create a vision of where we're going, story can do that as well. So that's why I think story is incredibly powerful, because it has this ability to connect in a way that no other medium really does well.
And I've noticed that I mean, you listen to like any TED presentation, and almost always it starts out with a story, or there's a
Yeah,
story that's kind of like the meat of the presentation.
absolutely. Yeah. And especially, I mean, now you can use that sloppily, in the sense of, you're just throwing everyone likes a story, let me throw in a story. But if you use that strategically, if that story can be unpacked, and that there's meaning within that story that you keep referring to, whoa, you're onto a winner. Because then people not only going to remember the story, they're also going to remember what the message and the core of the message is about.
So in terms of, if you're coaching someone who's, say a business leader who gives presentations, or any sort of public speaker, when it comes down to sort of formulating a story, um, not that it's formulated in terms of being like fake, but in terms of putting
Yeah.
together, a presentation, what are the most important like components of that story that are going to make it really hit home with the audience? Like what goes into a great story?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, of course, you need a protagonist. So you need the characters. So you need good characters. And when it comes to stories, you've got to be careful that you're not always the hero, because people get turned off when you're the answer to everything, or that you puff yourself up. So very often, in a story, like a guru or someone else apart from you should stand out. But what you need is, first of all, you need good characters. People need to know, well, why am I interested in this person? And then there needs to be, the second element is conflict. So conflict is inherently interesting. If Star Wars happened and they were just going around the galaxy and everyone's at peace and having fun, there wouldn't be a story. But because there's conflict, now that's interesting. So there has to be some form of conflict in the story. And then the final element, the third element, I'd say, and there has to be then resolution. So there has to be some form of resolution to that story as well. Now, the antagonist, so there has to be like a protagonist and antagonist in these two stories. It can be a person, or it can also be a thing. It doesn't necessarily be a person. So like, say, for example, let's say I work a little bit with the medical community. So the enemy can be, instead of a person, it could be cancer. So here I am fighting cancer, and then there's a conflict with that. So all of those are interesting. If you look at any good story, it has great characters, there's conflict, and then there's some resolution to the conflict.
So it follows that formula is something that kind of repeats with.
Absolutely repeats. Now there are different, you can add to that, and now, but when you look at let's say there's a renewed interest in storytelling. There's lots of different books out there on branding and storytelling, etc. And some of them are a little more details than others, but really at the core, those three elements are always there.
In terms of do you see, like, I guess with emotional intelligence and sort of the facial expressions, that those concepts that we've already talked about, when that, I would assume those are a big role in terms of with storytelling, that that the person telling the story is able to properly convey like the emotional material of that story with facial expressions, with the different components of emotional intelligence. Like, do you see these all kind of coming together?
Absolutely, yes. So in other words, it's interesting. One of the questions I always pose whenever I teach a class is like, what's the worst thing about a speaker? Like, if you what do you hate? And more often than not, it'll come. There's lots of different things, but the one that kind of keeps coming to the top is someone who's monotone. There's no emotion in the voice. And then, what's the best thing you like about a speaker? And there's no number of different things, but really, at the core, then is passion. Which is really about emotion. And I said, well, there's a little biblical quote which I've stolen and kind of changed around a little bit, but I always say, passion can, or enthusiasm can cover a multitude of sins. So you don't have to be the best speaker in the world, but if you come out and there's a belief and a passion and an emotionality in the way people are inherently attracted to that, and they will connect and they will follow you along. So absolutely. So it is about that story and telling it with emotion and conveying that emotion, that enthusiasm, and people, of course, pick up on that.
Awesome. Irvine, what other besides the different concepts that we've talked about so far, like, tell me some of the other components of your work when it comes to working with leaders, and just in terms of resilience, emotional intelligence. What have we missed so far?
What have we missed? I think there's a renewed interest in empathy, and how one shows empathy. I'm actually partnering with a good colleague of mine in Boston, and she's a researcher on empathy in Harvard, and she's a psychiatrist, Helen Weiss, and we both do some work now with police departments. And what we're doing is we're going in and talking about not only emotional intelligence but of empathy training as well. How do we connect with other human beings so that we can get to the core of what's happening and also have the skills to perhaps diffuse a tense situation? And how do we respond well to the person's needs in front of us? So, an empathy there is incredibly important, to be able to not only cognitively understand perhaps what they're going through, but then also perhaps emotionally begin to feel as well what they're going through. So I'm seeing a lot of renewed interest in the work and empathy, and how do we kind of teach people to expand their empathy? Um,
And yeah,
what's sure, yeah, sorry.
I was just going to ask, related to what you were saying with police departments, like what I guess what tell me kind of, I guess, what the purpose of developing empathy for like a first responder might be, and then how that could actually, enhance either their job performance, or I would assume also probably cut down on the amount of uh, errors in their performance, or potentially uh, biases or prejudices that it is developing empathy. Can that kind of counter some of those things?
So I think it can. I think one of the things that we have learned in our work so far is that police officers are called out. I mean, we hear the tragic situations that have happened, of late. But in a general day, police officers are called out to a multitude of different situations, and more often than not, many of them are involved in mental health issues, etc. So, what and sometimes police officers are not trained for that. And so part of it is, first of all, being able to recognize what situation am I in. And the majority of situations are not life threatening. They're not situations where my life is at stake in this interaction. And so, therefore, in those situations, I think empathy can really help get to the core of what an issue is, and really make sure that the person that I'm dealing with is given the services, if they're available, and able and help kind of disarm the person I'm talking emotionally to kind of calm down a little bit, or to talk. So all of that empathy training can help in that area, and really make sure that we're being effective in the conversations that we're having. Um, the biases are important too, because that's, I always say, bias is not something we can train away. Bias is something we can become more aware of. This is part of being a human being. As a human being, we have biases. It's our brain's way of pattern making, and our brain is not it's inherently lazy at times, so it'll create patterns. So in other words, about becoming more aware, how are we more aware? And part of that is, to be able to, when we're walking into a situation, to take a few moments to make sure how are we turning up, what biases might we have of that, to be aware perhaps of the biases as well, that people who are making calls in are also biased. So the information we're getting could be biased as well. So all of this it's a very difficult situation, and emotional intelligence is a critical skill, because it's enabling us to become more self-aware of the situation we're in, and then also deal, of the people that we encounter each and every day.
Irvine, do you have you looked at all at the sort of research going on with, in terms of with uh, like empathogens or entactogen, like substances, like say like a drug like MDMA, in terms of how that plays into uh, just this whole domain of an ability to empathize and cultivate one's empathy.
I've not, no, I have not looked in any, I mean, very brief, but nothing in depth. Yeah.
Got
And
it.
I'm intrigued, Tony, kind of what's that showing?
Well, I mean, MDMA as a substance, it's been like it was originally used like for psychotherapy, like for
Hmm.
couples counseling, right?
Yeah.
Back in like the 60s or something before it got made illegal. So they knew for a while that it was able to like kind of create these like connections or help break down barriers between
Mhm.
people. And yeah, I would just be it would be super interesting once that gets more legalized, uh, at least
Mhm.
when it comes to like for medical purposes,
Yeah.
um, just tying into all the work that you're doing. I could totally see the synergy there.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Fascinating research. Yeah. It reminds me, of research of talk about couples, and recognizing emotions, etc. But John Gottman he has spent his career studying couples and signs of strife in the relationship. And one of the things that he's able to do now through the recognition of contempt, just the ability to recognize if a relationship is going to break down or not, about 98% with 98% accuracy, just from looking at conversations and the signals between the couples, which is fascinating. This whole language that's happening with at a time we're just not aware of it.
Right. Well, Irvine, in terms of like working with uh like I guess in terms of working with all of these organizations, training people, being a keynote speaker, what have you found in terms of through for your own performance to be really crucial for you to be able to like explain these all these topics and help convey kind of everything that you've studied and learned about in a proper and effective way?
Um, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, I would say my own self awareness. So, my own ability to be aware of where I'm at in the moment. And the challenges to that, I think, are very insightful to me because I think that's what is insightful to other people as well. So, the habit of checking in on a regular basis with yourself, the reality that if I am tired, especially tiredness, if I am tired, if I'm hungry, all of that impacts how I show up, my ability to manage my own emotions, my ability to read other emotions, and that is, and then with that comes a huge dose of humility. So I am practicing a skill and teaching a skill that at times, because of the different things that are going on in our day, we do well one day, and to use another, we suck the next day. And I think it needs, so in other words, to convey that this is an ongoing learning. We're peeling an onion, so we'll never become to complete awareness of who we are, our motives, desires, our emotional life. It's always a learning process and something we notice, and to have the patience to notice, and just the humility to understand that even on the best day, it can be a struggle at times too, depending on what you're going through. So I think that's really helps me. And I think that helps people understand as well that this is not just a skill that all of a sudden you switch on and then hey presto, every day from then you're like operating at a level 10. There are days when it's just not going to happen, and to be able to understand that is important.
What about, I wanted to ask you when it comes to hidden emotions,
Mm-hmm.
uh, kind of talk to me about what comes to mind in terms of both, I would assume in some people who maybe lack that sort of self-awareness, they might be able to, or they might be, you know, experiencing and feeling some emotion that they're not necessarily aware of why they're feeling it, or maybe even what they are feeling. But also, I guess on the flip side, when it comes down to to reading those sort of people? Like, are you able to uh, cultivate the sort of ability to maybe read like an emotion that someone's hiding, that they're trying to like repress? Are there telltale signs of that?
So it's a great question. I think so. First of all, it is a training that you can, absolutely, as you said earlier. So it's a skill set you can learn. When people are trying to hide an emotion, so first of all, what you will get brief hints before they have squelched that emotion. More often than not, it is going to be what we call leaked, and you're going to see some signs of that in the face. So, like in a work situation, you're giving a deadline for a project, and one of the people, all of a sudden, you see some fear in their face, but they squelch it. And so that then gives you data. Oh, I wonder why that is. Now, this is where you got to be careful. Just because you see, say, fear, that emotion is genuine because the configuration of the muscles in the face show that it's genuine. What we don't know is why they're fearful. And so that's where the power of questions come in. That's where the power of being able to say, manage the conversation that might help bring out what is it that this person's fearful about? Because it could be that they're fearful of not being able to get the work done on time, or they could be fearful that they're going to miss their kid's soccer game, or whatever it is, So that's where that's helpful. The other thing, and yes, there are people who are unaware that sometimes the emotions are showing in their face. And again, you have to be very careful too, because what this is not to do is to say, hey, you're sad. Why? I'm seeing you're showing sadness in your face. Why? It's something to be a little more gentle about, and just to be aware. Sadness is an interesting one as well, because sadness, sometimes people just want to be left alone and they want to process it. But to be a little more subtle then in the use of language around that, and just saying, hey, I'm feeling that perhaps you might be a little down. Is there anything I can do, or do you want to talk about anything, or something? Something that is a little more less aggressive than kind of coming full on, and what I'm seeing is important.
Great. Well, Irvine, I really enjoyed this discussion here. These concepts are all fascinating to me. If I guess any closing thoughts related to anything that we've discussed today, or anything else that you want to talk about related to anything?
Excuse me. The one thing I just say is that very often emotions get a bad rap. And emotions, people think like anger, like, oh, anger is a bad emotion. And I always like to say, there's no good or bad when it comes to emotions. Emotions develop for a reason in the human person, and they helped us respond to situations that were important. And the more we are aware of those in ourselves and in others, it really is a little bit of a superpower, because it enables us to make connection, enables us to influence. So, and the other great thing that I haven't mentioned so far, and it's important, is that emotional intelligence is something that can be learned and expanded throughout our lives. So today you might sit and say, look, I think I'm very low emotional intelligence. Well, you can begin to start doing some practical exercises, etc., and begin to change that. That's the wonderful thing about this. And emotions are there to truly help us in our lives, and they protect us. They keep us safe, but they also help us enjoy life. And I think anything that can enrich our life is important. And so that's why I think diving into the world of emotions is so incredibly important.
Well said. Well, Irvine, if people, if the listeners want to connect with you or learn more about your work, where would you direct them to?
Sure. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm there, but then also my website, irvinenugent.com. If people want to explore a little bit more about emotional intelligence, there's actually a little free e-course in which I delineate what it is, and there's some practical exercises there, because really, a lot of emotional intelligence is about practical exercises. So if you go to irvinenugent.com, which is my name, /gift. You'll have access to the course there. And then I also do an educational video every Wednesday on YouTube. So if you've got a YouTube, if you're a YouTube watcher, go there, subscribe, and it's a different topic in the workplace or at home around emotional intelligence.
Well, definitely, yeah, go ahead and check that out, guys. And for those listeners who did enjoy the show, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where Roscoe's Wetsuit. Also, if you guys could leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, that would be greatly appreciated. You can find audio versions of the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and just about anywhere else that audio podcasts are available. Irvine, again, I wanted to really thank you for your time today and coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you on.
Toby, thank you. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate the invitation.